So I've seen this chart recently that's pretty shocking, actually. I think it's aggregate Chinese energy production, just completely vertical, right? And the U.S. is basically flat, and they've long since surpassed us. Maybe not long since, but they have significantly surpassed us. I don't recall the axes and the metrics specifically on that chart, but basically China is producing a lot more energy than the United States. However, they don't have favorable regulatory landscape. Like, how does that weigh into your view of global Bitcoin mining?
It does. It does. So governments left to their own devices hate to compete. They hate to compete, right? This is why the motor vehicles department is terrible in all 50 states, because it's very hard to shop driver's licenses, right? The defense story, the national security story, is one of the few areas where governments truly are competing, right? Currency is another, so it all ties together. The Chinese energy story is a good example of the United States, which has great energy abundance in many ways: gas, wind, solar. We have a great nuclear fleet that may expand, frankly. We have the technology, right? What we now benefit from, in my view, is the competition, right? I think this has been a bit of a wake-up call to policymakers at the local, state, and federal level to really adapt and then surpass Chinese energy production. It's not going to happen overnight. We have a few things here that differentiate us from China, one being very, very robust private property laws. So it's not necessarily a case of snapping your fingers and expropriating land and building whatever you want under the power of the state. But I think that from a market forces perspective, your energy chart, which you're calling attention to, is very interesting. But if you look at CapEx on data centers, in the United States, spend on data centers is about to surpass spend on commercial real estate, right?
Wow.
Right. Which, if that goes upstream, creates a massive market signal for energy, right? And so the Chinese approach, central planning, right? Quotas, 5-year plans, it can be very effective if you bet on a winner and it so happens that they win. But the US's approach, which has been historically much more focused on market mechanisms, right? And pricing as a means of determining the allocation of resources, it's served us well for almost 250 years. And I'm pretty confident that it will serve us well with energy.
Boy, I hope so. Man, that sounds, because that would be, it doesn't matter how much energy China is producing if you don't have that foundation of rule of law and whatnot, because you just can't play there, right? It's too much uncertainty.
It's very tough. It's uncertain. The private property foundation of capitalism, right? Bitcoin, great example. Your currency being your own, you can self-custody it. No one can debase it. This is in part the energy story and the Bitcoin story do tie together in that manner. But again, I think when it comes to competition, we spoke about energy. I think Bitcoin is an incredible example of competition in currency in a way the world has really not seen in a long time, right? Where, you could argue that all over the world, folks are typically captive to the local currency. Right now, with institutions, they can do sophisticated hedging and maybe get dollar exposure, et cetera. But your average middle class
individuals are not doing that.
They're captive to the local central bank in a way, right? And that, to me, is an enormous opportunity for Bitcoin. Now, I think the United States, again, with their pro-crypto administration, has also seen an opportunity for the stable coins, right? Stable dollars. I mean, there are members of the middle class and, frankly, all over the world that would love to keep their savings in dollars, but have not had the exposure to do so or not had the means to do so. We have built those technological bridges now, and we've given regulatory clarity in the United States. And once again, we're now seeing competing. Just recently, the EU is now green lighting or trying to speed up, frankly, a stable euro. They had no interest in this a few years ago. They didn't have to compete. Why? But you see the stable dollar and you see what that could do. Stable euro suddenly comes, right? And again, in the background, I see Bitcoin, this $2 trillion asset class, ready to underscore kind of a debasement-free currency. And I think it's very good.
Yeah, it's definitely catalyzing all of the innovation, if we're going to use that term, in central banks and whatnot. But I still think they've basically, I don't know if atrophied is the right term. They've never had an innovative portion of their DNA. So I don't think these central bank digital currencies or anything like that, they're just not going to work, right? The U.S. government struggles to build a website. How the hell is it going to build CBDC?
I like to look to history for lessons, right? And so one that's very interesting is that the Hong Kong dollar is in many ways one of the original stable coins because it trades in a band with the US dollar, and they obviously they're fighting to keep it within the band at times, but it's kind of an OG stable currency, right?
They're pegging it to the dollar
Correct.
through open market
operations and through committee decisions, but they're trying to keep the Hong Kong dollar in a range, right, tied to the USD. So it's got some stable characteristics. The other thing, though, if you go to Hong Kong and you see the banknotes, they tend to have pictures of the bank that issued them on the banknote. And so now if you look at stable coins, right, we don't have a central bank digital currency in the United States, right? But we've got a Circle currency, right? We've got a Tether currency. There's a few of these traditional finance institutions that are going to launch their own currency. Stripe said that they want to do a currency, right? And so in a way, we're seeing this interesting innovation from the other side of the world come to the United States, right, with various competing forms of banknotes. Now, all of them, now with regulatory clarity, there's some certainty that a Stripe dollar or whatnot is protected, or at least has some sort of framework for what's under it, right? But in a way, what's old is new.
Yeah. Yeah, well, everybody loves the shitcoin, right? The printing money business is a good business to be in.
Truly.
So what we've touched on, like how Bitcoin mining intersects with the energy sector, but another thing, in addition to explaining Bitcoin mining to someone who's unfamiliar with it, there's also the whole project of explaining how Bitcoin mining changes the energy sector, or the influence it has on it, the impact it has on it over time. What are the big things? What are the big needle movers for Bitcoin on global energy markets? Sure.
So within the United States, Bitcoin mining solves two issues, right? One is intermittency, and the other is stranded assets. Right. And so as you think about mining, you think about how am I going to turn energy into currency at the lowest possible cost, right? The energy grid in the United States is frankly very lumpy, right? We've seen a massive emergence of solar, right? You're harvesting energy from the sun. The cost of a solar panel has been a plummeting curve beyond expectations. I mean, you see old charts of where they predicted solar capacity would go over time, and usually it's a sigmoidal graph, and it seems like it's actually where the top is. We're not there yet, right? Wow. Globally, it's incredible to see the advent of solar. Now that comes at a cost, though, right? Sun doesn't shine at night. Now, government officials may prefer otherwise. If they could legislate, in the name of ESG, that the sun shines at night, they would probably do so, right? But it doesn't, right? So it's created an interesting market signal, because during the day in deregulated markets, sunlight's quite abundant and solar panels are quite cheap. And so you've seen in Texas, for example, where I live, some of the hottest days of the year, right, in Texas have actually had very reasonable energy prices, right? And that's partially due to the fact that it's sunny outside. And so the hot days tend to be sunny, right? And so it's been a balancing force. However, as soon as the sun goes down, where's your base load, right? What are you going to do to actually power stuff at night, right? Because a lot of energy use spikes. There's something called the duck curve, right? Energy is not necessarily a nice graph, right? And so the ways that they've tried to get around this, right? The batteries are an up and coming way to do it. You could build natural gas. You could overbuild thermal, sources of energy that can work at night. But that doesn't actually solve the daytime abundance issue. And so in a way, Bitcoin mining is a way to monetize that energy into a very rapidly fungible currency, right? And so even if a utility, or even if an independent power producer was not philosophically long Bitcoin to begin with, typically businesses are philosophically long getting paid, right? And so miners have been able to step in as that customer to shore up a lot of this overproduction of energy. Again, I actually don't think overproduction of energy is really a thing. What I mean by that is that every electron that humanity generates, right, it captures, right? And that where you've seen that actually play out is oil and gas, where just because the United States is reducing oil consumption, or China is trying to wean off of coal, that energy trapped in these fossil fuels is getting sent to another market where someone will buy it, right? Every hydrocarbon that is mined is used, or every hydrocarbon that is extracted is used, right? And so Bitcoin miners, over time, again, we're still fairly early. Industrial mining or massive institutionally scale mining is still new. But over time, you will see mining, I believe, be part and parcel with the energy story of a given grid overall. Right. Because you have some surplus electrons, at least for a time being. Sure. Right. And we can come in there and be that customer for you.
So is that the energy buyer of last resort kind of narrative, that it's basically when these electrons get oversold, there's just a buyer that will buy them?
Overproduced. Overproduced. If markets hate imbalances. They try and self-correct. right? Every surplus tends to be followed by going out of business. So it's followed by scarcity.
Yeah.
Markets have a cycle, right? And so we've discussed the Bitcoin cycle. Energy oftentimes can go on a similar cycle. I do think, though, that when it comes to energy in the U.S. and globally over time, we're about to enter into a new era of human energy production, but also consumption. And let me explain. We are now able to turn energy into currency, right? This is a new innovation from Bitcoin, very straightforward, right? Now, you could argue that back in the day, you turned gold into currency via a lot of energy as well. This is much more efficient, right? So that's level one. Level two, which is we're just hitting now, is you can turn energy into intelligence, right? Data centers, AI factories, as NVIDIA calls them, right? So suddenly you can turn energy into intelligence, which is almost fungible as a good. You could route it towards generating movies. You could route it towards pharmaceuticals. You could route it towards writing college essays for kids. I mean, the fungibility of energy into intelligence, that is fairly new. And that is a big deal. Now, the third layer, we're not there yet, but in the next couple of years, you're going to see the advent of industrial robotics at a scale we've never seen before. And suddenly your ability to turn energy directly into labor, wow. I mean, again, looking at historical analogies. If you think about the garment district in New York, why were people sewing clothes in New York City, right? Now it's all studios and lofts and ritzy apartments, right? Why were they doing that? Because that's where the labor was, right? That's where the labor was. You're going to see that happen again where all of these robotics or roboticized industries are going to get closer and closer to the electron because that's where labor is. And that's where labor is going to be.